Hi students, welcome to the recap of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of your textbook for the Intercultural Communication course. So in this recap, I'm not going to go in depth to each of the concepts, but I will basically walk you through all the key concepts from Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 to make sure that you know what you need to highlight and to have a deeper understanding of. Let's start with the first one, which is why do we need to study intercultural communication? There are so many different reasons that are provided in Chapter 1, and that includes adjusting to the global workplace, right? Because the reality is our situation has changed and continues to change, and the borders are continue to be more porous. And what that means is that there is this movement of working people moving from one country to another, and that's going to affect the domestic workforce here in the US. It's also helping us to engage in creative multicultural problem solving. And one of the key elements in this chapter 1 of your textbook, is the importance of fostering global and interpersonal peace, as it's stated as the peace imperative, right? So other than the reasons that are provided in the first chapter of your textbook, can you also mention what else, that becomes your motivation to study intercultural communications? Some of you may work in healthcare, and you see that you're going to treat a lot of different patients coming from different backgrounds, and you may think that it's very important to learn more about intercultural communication. So there are obviously, there's going to be personal reasons as well as this overarching reasons why we study intercultural communication. And then your textbook also talk about the 4 building blocks in understanding intercultural communication. The first one is culture, the next one is communication, the third one is context, and the last one is power. We're going to spend a bit more time in talking about culture, just because culture is such an important concept, and people sometimes think of culture as just something external from themselves. Like for instance, culture is all about food, or culture is all about traveling to a different country, or culture is about something that's different than themselves. Whereas in fact, we understand that culture is actually intrinsic to ourselves, and it is the element that shape who we are. I like to start this kind of exercise to understand culture better by asking this question. Rank order the following in terms of their importance in defining American culture. And we understand when we're looking at each of these elements that we're thinking of intrinsic to our American culture, turns out to be coming from other countries, coming from other cultures. Think about this idea of apple pie, hamburger, pizza, tacos. I know that you will be able to basically find the roots of where all of these elements are coming from. For instance, pizza, we understand is coming from Italy. Taco, we understand is coming from Mexico. So now we started to question ourselves. So what do we think about elements that we considered as our part of our culture, when in fact it comes from somewhere else? So the question of what is culture, I'm giving one definition of culture here, because if you do your own research, and you see there are hundreds and hundreds of this definition. I think this one is pretty solid, because it's showing that culture is a learned meaning systems that consists of patterns of traditions, beliefs, values, norms, meanings, and symbols that are passed on from one generation to the next, and are shared to varying degrees by interacting members of a community. So we understand that not only culture is all encompassing, it is taught, and there's that element of traditions that were, that are passed on from one generation to the next. And it includes our patterns of traditions, beliefs, values, norms, and even our understanding of meanings. All right, let's go down this rabbit hole a bit. Number one, we understand that culture is learned. Everything that we know about ourselves, we learn from when we were born, by the people who raised us, who teach us about how we should dress, how we should keep our body clean, how we should go to school, how we should move about our life, right? So culture is the unique way we learn to eat, sleep, and seek shelters because we are part of the community that raised us. And when we move into new cultures, we learn new cultural patterns. We also understand that culture involves perceptions and values. So what do cultural groups learn and shares? First, they share perceptions or ways of looking at the world. For instance, we as American people, what do we value in ourselves? And how do we perceive ourselves? Is our perceptions of ourselves going to match with how others outside of the US perceive people from the US, for instance? So, culture can be described as a lens through which we view the world. Yeah. And what we see from here is that it's very subjective, it's highly subjective. And so there's no right or wrong, there's no best culture, worst culture. What we know is there are different cultures. Yeah. And that the process of perception is composed of three phases that include selections, organizations, and interpretation. We select from the stimuli that we see around us, we organize those as concepts in our head, and we interpret that based on our values of what we see as the correct way or the wrong way. But what we now understand is that there's no truly the best culture in the world. What we see are just variations of different cultures. And that culture involves feelings. It's experienced not only as perceptions and values, but also as feelings. When we are in our cultural surroundings, we feel this sense of familiarity and a certain level of comfort in the space, behavior, and actions of others. When you get to travel to a different place and then you see people are carrying themselves differently, they have different habits, they have different values, maybe just slight variation of it, and you kind of feel like, ooh, you need to learn how to adapt and adjust to this new culture, and it may make you feel a bit uncomfortable at first. So we might characterize this feeling as a kind of embodied ethnocentrism. Yeah, the feeling that, ooh, their culture is strange, my culture is normal, when in fact, again, what is normal? Because who gets to decide what culture is strange and what culture is normal? The stronger your identification with a particular space or cultural situation, the more difficult it might be to change spaces without experiencing discomfort. Now that we talk about this idea of perceptions, right, and feelings, we also understand that culture is always shared. It doesn't belong to just one individual. The ideas of cultures implies a group of people. So these cultural patterns of perceptions and beliefs are developed through interactions with different groups of individuals. As I said before, it shapes when we're at home, in the neighborhood where we grew up, at the school where we go, in youth groups, at college, and so on. So culture becomes a group experience because it is shared with people who live in it and experience the same social environments. And the next one is that culture is expressed as behavior. Again, I'm asking this question of what is American culture as expressed as behavior. For instance, when we first introduce each other, do we shake hands? Do we kiss each other's cheeks? Do we touch nose? Some cultures does that. So, what is American culture? Can you give some examples? And I do want to highlight that it's very important to understand that we belong to many different cultural groups and that these groups collectively helps determine our perceptions, beliefs, and behavior. And knowing that it's shaped by the members of the group, we know that culture is dynamic and heterogeneous. It's always changing, it's open, and that's what is so exciting and interesting about culture. The second building block, after we're talking about culture, is communication. And here is one definition of communication of many that you can find out there. Communication is a symbolic process whereby meaning is shared and negotiated. In other words, communication occurs when someone attributes meaning to another words or action. What's so important about communication is we feel like we can communicate because we're human beings and we are socialized to communicate with one another. But we learn that communication is not as simple or as easy as we may think, right? You may know how to talk, but you may not know how to communicate effectively and communicate in such a manner that you show sensitivity towards the context where you're communicating. So I do encourage you to learn more about this building block on communication. The third one is context, which always matters because again, where you communicate, to whom you communicate, is key in determining, basically showing how you should communicate effectively for that context. So the physical, social, or virtual situation in which communication occurs is key for intercultural communication. And the last one is power. And this is very important to understand that power is always present when we communicate with each other, although it is not always obvious. We often think of communication between individuals as being between equals, but this is rarely the case, right? It seems like it is ingrained in us to know that we're all equals, and that's true, but at the same time, for instance, you're going to school, you're getting a ride from your friend. In that instance, your friend may have the more power because they have the vehicle to take you both to the campus. And so the interaction might alter just in a slight bit, just because somebody has more power over you, for instance. And this is so interesting to observe, that in every society, a social hierarchy exists that gives some groups more power and privilege than others. And those in power, consciously or unconsciously, create and maintain communication systems that reflect, reinforce, and promote their own ways of thinking and communicating. And there are two types of group-related power, one that is more permanent and the other one that is more changeable and involve membership in voluntary groups based on educational background, geographic location, marital status, and socioeconomic background. And last but not least, I do want you to spend time to understand all of these key concepts of ethnocentrism, stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, and to truly understand the differences between each of them. And I'm hoping that the additional material that I assign you to watch and or listen is going to help you understand how each of these concepts interplays in the intercultural communication context. All right, that's basically the recap of chapter 1 and chapter 2. I wish you the best of luck for the next week where we're going to learn about history and intercultural communication. Thank you again, and I look forward to reading your discussion posts.